here on. Okay. All right. Wonderful. So, okay, finally, let's begin. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining tonight. We really appreciate your patience. This is my great friend, Jonathan, who is joining us from Melbourne, Australia. Jonathan, if you want to say hello to everyone.
Hello, everyone.
Okay. So today we have scheduled this talk. It's called the Esoteric Psychology of Self-Transformation, which is obviously in the Gnostic tradition is something that we are always exploring. As you all know, Gnosis is a path of self-knowledge. It's in a way takes on something very similar to the Buddhist tradition in regards to knowing oneself. And we have this principle that when you begin to know yourself, you can begin to understand the world around you, as the Greeks said. And so there are a couple of things that I wanted to say before I invite my friend Jonathan here to join us. I was listening to this audiobook that's called Destructive Emotions, a very wonderful book that I recommend. And in this book, something very interesting in reference to psychology was said by Alan Wallace. He said that in the West, referring to Western psychology, normality is the goal. Whereas in Buddhism, and we can say really in Gnosticism or any spiritual tradition, normality is just the start of the path. And self-realization is the goal. The goal is to completely develop all of our human and spiritual abilities, capacities, right? What Carl Jung used to say, we need to become complete men, right? And in order to do that, we need to go beyond our intellectual understanding of ourselves. We need to tap into our spiritual nature, which in Gnosticism we call the being. And so in Gnosticism, we say that psychology without ontology, which is the study of the being, the study of our profound spiritual nature, is incomplete and limited. And for a complete self-transformation, we need to bring this new element and this new aspect into our lives. And of course, we need to connect with that as well. And I know that talking to Jonathan before, we agreed on this point. And so he mentioned something in relation to self-perception and how that's important in the work. So, Jonathan, I'll let you share your knowledge with us in regards to that.
My limited knowledge. But yeah, first of all, I want to thank you, Christian, for giving me the opportunity to share something that I'm, really passionate about, which I think I know in myself has been tremendous in my inner work to come to comprehend these things, within my own capacity. And I hope to share or, give something valuable, which is why I'm giving a talk on a subject that is practical. So that's something, that I think within the subject, everyone can understand this in relation to what is relevant to them and themselves in regards to where they find themselves in their inner work and their own degree of comprehension based on the experience that they've gained and accumulated so far in regards to Gnosis, or, maybe you've dabbled into Christianity or Buddhism, Taoism, I don't know, right? I mean, there's so many different teachings or school, but at the essence of it all, it's all towards the same goal and purpose. So, and actually, I was, it's interesting that you were talking about the goals, because that was like my second point on my list to talk about what is the goal of Gnosis. So, really, I think it's always important to kind of highlight what is Gnosis. Because, I think everyone knows that Gnosis is a Greek word that means knowledge, but it's not any type of knowledge. It has to do with a deep, intimate knowing of oneself based on what we experience, but really about realizing an inner truth. That's really what Gnosis is about. So, and then from there, really, like what Christian was saying, we develop, uncover, and realize many different aspects about who it is that we are and what it is that we are not, right? So that's something really important and fundamental, because really, if we knew who we were, we wouldn't be asking these questions of who am I, where am I going, and where do I come from?
All right.
So first of all, who in oneself is asking these questions? I think, at first, everyone comes to Gnosis or to spiritual teachings for different reasons. Sometimes maybe, we've had some tragedies in life or some things that make us kind of wonder what life is, or, some painful situations. Maybe we're tired of suffering and we're trying to find a way to, transcend that. And that's the beginning of it, I think, right? We're in quest of some answers. And in this process, we come to know what is it that makes us suffer. And then as we deepen our work and our perception and our understanding, we really come to know what is the real cause of suffering. And as they say in Buddhism, it's rooted in ignorance.
Right.
But ignorance of what? So before I talk about that, the goals of Gnosis essentially have like three fundamental pillars, which Christian touched on. But I think in synthesis, we can say that one is about what we can call self-realization, right? What is this self, this being that needs to be realized in ourselves? And this point is extremely important, because this quest is about seeking, understanding, and finding our being, and then really to realize what the being is inside of us. Then this moment that we begin to be conscious of that, then it leads us to the second point, which is the awakening of our consciousness, the awakening to essentially to reality, right? Awakening is not about creating dreams and fantasies. It's about a deep connection, understanding, comprehension, and integration with reality within ourselves, and obviously within the world that we're in. And then really the third factor is about liberating our consciousness from these conditioning factors, or what we commonly call in Gnosis, the mind, the ego, and the personality, which I'm not sure if you've touched on that, but I'm sure you will in future talks. But really, this ego is this false self that we have created based on beliefs and a false identity, because we've ignored who we are. We've lost connection to that. So
yeah, we've created a false self, as we say. And just to emphasize something on what you're saying, there's this wonderful thought by Samael Aun-Weor, and he says, to see with infinite lucidity is only possible in the absence of the ego, right? Of the myself, of one's false self. So that just what you just said just reminded me of that, right? So the ego is like this filter that doesn't allow us to see clearly, not just the world around us and others, but not even ourselves. And seeing ourselves is not just our thoughts and our emotions, but what's behind all of that, which I think is where you're trying to get to, which is what we call the being in Gnosis.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. So this really, the ego is nothing more than the distorted perception of ourselves, because it begins from there. If we don't really know ourselves, understand who we are, then, everything that we connect to in life begins with our inner psychology. Our psychology is essentially the totality of our life. How we think, how we feel, how we act, how we speak, and essentially, in essence, how we are, who we are. Yeah. So, one of the, and I've been thinking about this a lot lately, again, because who doesn't like to think about these things, right?
At least we do.
Well, it's so interesting, because really we're, right now we're, I mean, I don't know where all the viewers or listeners are from, but one thing that we're all experiencing is this COVID-19 situation, right? This is something that we've experienced as a humanity. And, for us in Australia, things are beginning to ease, but it's something that has affected us globally, right? Maybe at first we thought maybe, oh, this wouldn't really reach us. And then next thing we know, right, half the planet is in lockdown. So, yeah. So really, one of the very interesting things, and this is going to be my next point, and it's something that I read in a book that probably many of you have heard before, but I never made the connection directly between these two concepts or these two words or this type of perception. So in the East, they often refer to this world as Maya. I think everyone who's studied spirituality or a little bit of esotericism has heard of the word Maya before, right? And essentially, the meaning of that word is illusion, deception, and appearance. That's the synthesis of it. But then in the West, when we hear that word, we might think, oh, it's only because they often associate it to the fact that this world, the physical world, is an illusion, which I guess, within its own degree of understanding is true. But at the same time, the physical reality is a fundamental expression of divinity in creation, in life. So the physical world is not an illusion as such. It's that we conceive it only as the total reality. That is the illusion. So the way that this author, Yogananda, he said that really what is Maya is the perception of what we call relativity and duality, which is actually really interesting. So, duality is essentially everything that we conceive as negative or positive, good and bad, big and tall, convenient, inconvenient, that we like and dislike, the past and the future. And then really for the vast majority of our life, that's how we relate to life. Right? We feel certain things in ourselves as well that we like. We like certain thoughts, we dislike certain thoughts, certain emotions arise that we accept and reject, right? That which we like, we want to focus on intensely. But then those emotions or sensations that we dislike or don't feel so good to us, then we try to avoid them. We reject them.
It reminds me of that Buddhist notion of the three aspects, the three psychological aspects that keep us locked in the wheel of samsara. And two of them are craving, aversion, and the third one is ignorance. And so because of ignorance, because of not having a correct perspective, or what the Buddha would call an upright view or correct understanding of the reality that we're in, right, we tend to think that we will find happiness and we will find the truth by going after our cravings and the things that we find pleasurable, and avoiding, right, the things that we find unpleasurable, which is what you were saying about good and bad and avoiding certain things. And in that process, what we ignore that. What we're doing is we're actually pushing away certain elements of life that are here to show us something, to help us grow and develop. And so if we are in this constant sort of just search for pleasure or pleasant things or goodness, or even finding, heaven, quote unquote, right? We all create our little heavens here on earth. And trying to push away all suffering, all pain. Huh?
Said especially now that we're all like in quarantine,
Right, yeah. And so we don't realize that we limit ourselves. And so, but when and I love what you're saying, that, illusion or Maya, it's not related to, or spiritual development. It's not related to getting away from the physical world, or again, leaving this world, because it's all here and now. And what we're all about is, or what Gnosticism is about, is to teach us to see reality from a broader perspective. And that's
Exactly.
what, yeah.
Yeah, beautiful. Yeah. So this, really the conditioning that we call relativity and duality essentially creates in our perception that we have a separate existence to life, to the unity of life, which is really profound. This, it's worth thinking about, contemplating, meditating, going for walks and think about it. And really, we disconnect from life as a whole, but then really this perception begins with, like I was saying at the beginning, that we create a separate existence outside of our being, outside of our true reality. And this is really the beginning of what we call relativity, right? Because relativity, in the sense, not in the theory, anyway, from the way that Einstein talked about it. If you're wondering, my accent is French Canadian, so I apologize if things are a bit funny. So we ignore, and it separates us from our own unity, where we come from, our own true nature. And then this is really the root of suffering. Really, we wander in life looking at so many different things to make us happy, to make us feel whole. How many relationships have we found to try to fill this emptiness or this void that we perhaps have? Or maybe, we're impelled by certain desires and we don't even know, right? But then something shifts, that we return our attention inward. And then this question again arises of, who am I? And then we begin to realize that really we have a self. We have an aspect of ourselves that perceives, that thinks, that feels, and that is. So realizing this aspect that, one, we have an interior world or an interior universe, is the first step to really begin to thin the veil of the illusion that we live in. Because until we realize that in some way, in the esoteric sense, in the spiritual sense, we don't really have a type of foundation. It leaves us in the realm of theories and beliefs, and people can spend years and years, read hundreds of books, but without having this fundamental aspect that I am an aspect and a part of my own divinity, what we call in Gnosis the being. So this is really profound, and this is really important, because from there, realizing this truth changes the perception of who you are, and therefore changes the perception of life. So, in Buddhism, they call the essence, which is an aspect or a part of consciousness that emanates, or that is part of your divinity. I don't know, I want to keep it simple, but essentially what they refer as the essence is what they call the Buddhata, which I think is such a beautiful definition, because essentially what it means is the Buddha nature, the seed of the Buddha nature. So then this seed needs to grow. And in time, with what we call the realization, this essence, this Buddhata, then transforms and realizes itself as what we know as the Buddha. The Buddha, in those terms, is our inner being, which is the true identity that we have.
Yeah, let me just add something to that. I think it's very important too, and it reminds me of this. In Buddhism, they have this practice called the Three Jewels, in which they recommend that all souls take refuge in. And those 3 jewels are, I'll begin from the bottom up as the most, uh, just to put this, to get this point across. And they refer to these as, these 3 jewels as, the Sangha, which is the spiritual community, that we all need to find a spiritual community and find refuge in the spiritual community, find like-minded individuals that are in the path, and that will help you comprehend the work that you have to do. The second one is the Dharma, which are the teachings, right? The teachings of the truth, right? And so we need to find the spiritual community, which is in Gnosis we would call connect with the tradition, and then connect, also with the teachings. And as you begin to obviously put the teachings into practice, that turns itself into the Dharma, or into what we call revelation in Gnosis. So you begin to see the truth. But then the other important point of that is, the third jewel, or the first one, depending on how you look at it, is the Buddha. And that Buddha is, again, like you were explaining, that inner Buddha, right? Not just, which is usually represented or physically manifested as the physical master that brings you to the teachings, that teaches you, the elemental notions of spirituality. But ultimately, right, the purpose of the guru or the teacher is to help you connect with your inner Buddha, with your inner being, what we call the being in Gnosis. And so once we connect with that being, then our perception expands. And so it's very interesting, right? Because you come into a spiritual community, your perception expands a little bit, and then in there you get the teachings, and then your perception expands a little bit and is understanding. But then once you connect with the Buddha, that's when your perceptions completely shift, and now you see life, as you were saying, from a completely different perspective, because now you begin to see yourself and you begin to see the world, in a completely new, more open, or more open way, which is I always tell the students that it's been my personal journey, that when I came into Gnosis, and the more that I practice Gnosis, it hasn't been about, sort of, come in with concepts that I had about life and getting rid of those concepts and now putting new concepts in, but rather my experience has been that it has expanded the concepts that I had about who I was and about reality.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Beautiful. Yeah. So, yeah, kind of continuing with what you're saying, coming into realization of this aspect then begins to integrate us and connect us with our own unity. Because really, we have, everything is one, which is why the illusion that that separation and division, which, in essence is relativity, and duality, which is Maya, this realization of our own divinity, or this awareness of it, then begins to connect us and integrate us. Because really, as we have the unity in life, in the universe, in the planet, humanity, etc., we also have our own unity, this miniature replication of the universe, which is really what we call the being. The being is the universe, but in you. I mean, it sounds philosophical, and I guess it has a component of that, but there's a deep truth of that we have to realize ourselves, which is, this process is part of the self-realization. So, but then, seeing yourself that you are not your past, you're not all those mistakes that maybe you've done, those dramas, the suffering, that you like pizza or cheese, or, all these things. All of those are superficial things. Because what you truly are in your deepest aspect is 2 things. You are a being with consciousness. And having that correct perception of yourself, realizing that you are that, at first we think about it, we incorporate it, and then, with time, as we put these teachings into practice, experience meditation, and all of these aspects, right, then it becomes a way that we see. And perception is fundamental in how we come to know ourselves. Because the way that we see ourselves is directly connected to the degree of knowledge that we have about ourselves. You understand? So if we see ourselves as an essence, as a soul, then that means we will perceive that way. We will see that in ourselves. We'll see that, I've got some plants on my right. I know that these plants have like an aspect or an expression of divinity. I know that everything in life is connected. Really, you know what is the unity of life? It's what we call karma, cause and effect. That everything is intertwined into this intrinsic web that unites everything. That is, that's really what karma is.
Yeah, I love to see karma. Sorry to interrupt. It's an important point because I think most of us, when we come to the teachings, we usually have this concept, a very narrow perspective on concept of what karma is. That it's like the negative things that happen to me. But I've learned to see karma as this law that teaches us about the interconnectedness, right? The interrelationship, as you said, among all things. And exactly. Seeing it that way makes you understand, all right, what part do I play in this, right?
Exactly. Yeah, because sometimes you hear people say, "Oh, karma's a payback," or if something is done to us, or we see something apparently being done that is wrong in our conception, we think, "Oh, karma will get them back." Well, how do you know?
Yeah.
Right? But yeah. Karma is much more profound than this, because Master Samuel says something interesting, and I don't want to deviate from the topic, but he says, "No karma, no creation." That means that even the universe as we know it has an origin. Anyway, exactly. So this knowledge of oneself is fundamental, because really, if we're going to approach spirituality and undertake a spiritual work, if we want to experience the spiritual realms, it begins with our own inner spiritual dimensions, right? It's coming to understand that really our psyche is an expression of that divinity. Because really within our psyche, within our consciousness, are contained all of the attributes of our being. And those attributes have a human expression, right? Because you, as a soul, you inhabit this world, which implies that you are in some way an expression of your own divinity, right? That doesn't mean you go walking around, "Hey, I'm a living God," right? No, that doesn't mean that. So be careful with that. It means that because consciousness transcends relativity, right? It's about embodying these values, trying your best to have the correct way of thinking, a correct way of feeling, to try to express something that will enhance and allow others to connect with that aspect of themselves, to realize their own truth within. So it's important that we don't have this division within ourselves. Because sometimes, we can think, "Oh, ego is bad," and then essence is good. But in reality, they are a whole. Within the ego, we have what we call the essence, which is why and what we need to comprehend so that this essence can wake up. Because, like our teacher, I'm not going to say his name, but he said something really beautiful and I really like it. Essentially, he said that, the ego is the distortion of the reality of things. And then on the other end, awakening is the perception of truth. Plain and simple. The perception of truth is realizing the reality within. Right? But in order to do that, we need to have the right point of reference. at first, like what Christian was saying, which I think is so interesting, like these things that you said before about the skanda and the dharma and etc. Like I heard these things before, but I'm kind of understanding them in a different way now. So,
Cool.
but to think based on the teachings, right? The teachings that we receive, they're not here just to be taken as something that we're curious about, but to put them into practice. Because then, it creates a different type of thinking, right? The teachings really serve, and they're actually an expression and a means for your own divinity to reach you, to help you connect with that aspect. So, when we start to learn about meditation, to experience meditation, at first meditation is a bit of a struggle, let's be honest, right? Because we have these thoughts, we can't control our minds, many types of memories arise. And then, it's really like, oh my gosh, like I remember when I first started meditating, I say this as a bit of a joke, but I would like open my eyes and tell my teacher, like in my mind, like ring the bell, like just. But now it's like the opposite. It's like, oh, please don't stop. Because as you relax and the mind becomes more and more quiet, there's no type of desire that arises. There's no rejection of anything that arises in your mind. And as you settle into this, you connect with a deeper inner truth of yourself, where this sense of self begins to disappear. And what really arises is just the consciousness. And then at the center of your consciousness is what we call the being, which is that element that perceives. So anyway, the teachings really allow us to create a different reference point in our life by applying really two fundamental things, which, we talk about. And, if my students were here, they'd probably think, oh, not this again. What we call self-remembering and self-observation. These are the two columns of the psychological work. Have you talked a bit about this? Or
Yeah, as a matter of fact, we just started talking about that with the first chamber group that we have going on Wednesdays and Sundays now. We just started talking about, all of that.
Okay. Anyway, if you've heard this before, I apologize anyway, but have you realized that anything in life that you do, that you try to deepen, you always return to the foundation? The foundation is something that you constantly refer to in order to strengthen and deepen, to solidify, because that's what you build your house on. So self-remembering really, in a basic way, really implies that we remember the presence of God or of the being or your inner Buddha, however you want to call it, inside you. You place a conscious attention onto that presence. And then self-observation really implies that we make an effort to watch the thoughts that arises, the emotions that arise, and then with the purpose of comprehending them. This helps in order to establish consciousness, perception, not attached to anything, but in its true nature of seeing things as they are.
Right. It reminds me, what you're, this kind again of expanding our perception to have a clearer view of ourselves, and that's what ultimately self-observation and self-remembering, which is a very important aspect, not just self-remembering, because one of the things that I've realized that happens in the work, as Master Samuel explains, that sometimes, and this is something amazing that he says, that it is interesting to see that sometimes a student is observing himself, but can be completely forgotten about himself.
Yeah.
So at that point so we really have to understand this concept of self-observation, right? Which is not just the mind observing, not just our false self observing, not our personality observing, because what happens is one ego of self-defeatism or vanity observes another ego of yours and feels bad, right?
Yeah.
But when true
Or just
self-observation,
as good or bad.
right, and true self-observation is the self-observing. We tend to forget that there is the self that needs to be observing, and it's just observation, right? And so we really need. That's why, again, what you said is very important: the self-remembering, right? To remember your essential, your spiritual nature as you observe the world, and that's an important factor. Otherwise, it's just your mind observing your mind, and that's what happens. And then that creates, you judge yourself, you criticize yourself, and it creates just sort of self-defeatism. And but when the being observes himself, when we observe ourselves from the perspective of the consciousness, we see something quote unquote negative, and we say, oh, okay, great, now I can liberate myself from that.
Exactly.
And so what a difference, right? When the consciousness sees something, quote unquote ugly, or we see a mistake, we feel, oh, that's an opportunity to liberate myself from that conditioning. This is very interesting and very distinct experience.
Yeah. Yeah, fantastic. Actually, thank you for pointing that out. Because, Master Samuel he says that when we realize that we cannot observe ourselves without remembering ourselves, we are close to awakening consciousness.
Yeah.
So that's really, thank you for pointing that out. Yeah.
And a reminder to everyone, if you feel that you're struggling with self-remembering and you have this thought, I struggle to self-remember, that's a good sign, because that means that you're at least
actually
becoming
so
aware.
That is so important, because constantly, we hear people say, oh, it's so hard. But, do you realize that you believe that?
Yeah.
There's an aspect of yourself that you believe in that is telling you that it's difficult. And, that kind of disconnects you from your will. Because in reality, it's not hard, nor is it easy. It's just a matter of doing. Isn't it Yoda or something that said, do or do not, there is no try or something?
Right. Don't try, do it.
Turn to Yoda for enlightenment.
Yeah.
But this notion is really important, right? Because essentially, the way of thinking will play a fundamental role in how we are able to direct our efforts, right? That's why, one thing that tremendously helps us in continuing this effort and this work that we're on is a genuine yearning to know ourselves and to know our being, to have a deeper connection with that. That is like the fuel, the fire that will keep your soul burning tirelessly. That it will never what's the word, like vanish or extinguish.
Vanish,
It will never extinguish. So, and really, this is all possible with the right perception of ourselves. Because really, guess what? You never cease being who you are. You have always been a soul. You have always been an essence. And now with these teachings, with this work that we're doing, it's a deeper reconnection and a conscious realization of this truth.
Remembering.
So, right, this is really important. So from there, right, we understand that we have, just like, we have a role in life and our family, but we also have a role and a function, a meaning, our own spirit. In the East, when they talk about their gurus or their masters, they always, or maybe not always, I don't know, but they often see that those masters, those beings, are really like a temple where the divine dwells. And from there, those masters, those beings, those Buddhas, etc., they help humanity. Really, your true purpose in life comes from knowing yourself profoundly and the dimension of the spirit. So this is really what Gnosis is. And this comprehension, this development takes on many, many, many different octaves as we deepen our work, as we comprehend who we are, our psychology. It dissipates the illusion that we have. The deeper the truth that we realize, the more harmony, the more peace, the more balance, serenity, happiness, wisdom. There are countless aspects of your being that become naturally part of you. And this is why in Christianity they said, first seek the kingdom of God, and then all of these things shall be added unto you. Right? They didn't say go into the battlefield and slaughter, thousands of people, and then you will find God.
Yeah.
Right?
Or build a church and create your life first and then look for God.
Exactly. It says to look inward because all of these aspects of your being, which are intelligent forces, come to manifest and express themselves in you, in your psychology, in your consciousness. So this is really something divine and really important that changes our life tremendously. It changes ourselves, it changes our relationships. It gives you a different perception of life, really.
One of the
So
beautiful things about that, if I may add, in relation to, again, changing our perspective, and one of the wonderful things that, again, I've experienced is that when you begin to expand your perception of yourself, you expand your perception beyond just um, your thoughts, your way of being, and you begin to realize that there is indeed this spiritual, transcendental, peaceful, loving, kind nature that we all have. And so when you realize that, when you see that within yourself, then obviously you're going to begin to see that in other people as well. And so you no longer see those around you as just physical beings with a bunch of defects, just in the same way that I'm a physical being with a bunch of defects, but you actually begin to see something new, right? And that is a life-changing experience.
yeah, exactly. It's really about integrating oneself with the unity of life, beginning with yourself, and then, as you were saying, it expands, towards all beings, because
Right.
really we all come from the same source, what we call in Gnosis the Absolute,
Yes,
which
and
I think
that
Blavatsky called that the great ocean of life or something like that. Or
the great ocean of life, yeah, or the great
yeah,
spirit of life.
yeah.
And that reminds me of this wonderful quote that I shared with you earlier, um, from Master Samael, and he says, which goes in perfectly with this quote, and our necessity to perceive ourselves from a deeper point of view to understand ourselves better. Um, and he says, in order to have a vision, you must climb to the highest point of the mountain and gaze from there.
Yeah.
Right? And to begin the journey, you must descend to the depths of the abyss and start to walk from there. And that's such a beautiful and powerful quote because both aspects are important, right? The vision, spiritual vision, which is the experience of reality, right, of the being, of our spiritual nature. And once we see that, we realize, okay, that's my origin, that's my truth. And then you begin to realize, but there are things within me that are not allowing me to be in this wonderful state constantly. And so in
Yeah.
order to right, so in order to what we say in gnosis, there is a difference between or in Buddhism they say there's a difference between experiencing the void and realizing the void within you. One thing is to see God, now you see that he's there, and another thing is to completely embody God within you. which means that you have to go back down, as Master Samael says, to begin the journey to completely connect yourself with God. You have to descend again to the depth of the abyss, all the way down into our own psychological abyss, and then start to walk from there again. Now that you have a new perception, right? Now that you've, like you said, that point of reference is now there. Before that, we're sort of over here lost, and we have no point of reference. And so the spiritual vision, the spiritual experience, which is the result of devotion, of spiritual practice, gives you that point of reference, so that then you can begin to do the psychological work. And so again, it goes back to the beginning of what I was saying in the beginning, which it makes sense now, that without the experience of the spirit, you have no point of reference to do the psychological work.
Yeah. Or it's very limited. You do it more from the point of view of the mind. But then,
Right.
yeah, then, once you know that you are in essence, once you know you are the Buddhata, a soul, an aspect of divinity, it completely changes everything. So I think that's a beautiful quote. I don't have anything else to add. So I think that's a great way of ending. So this perception is fundamental. And just to wrap up, really, to recap, the degree of how we know ourselves is directly connected to the degree or correlates with the perception of oneself. Whoops. Hello?
Wonderful. Yep, I'm here.
Okay.
Yeah. That's a wonderful statement. It really synthesizes everything. And you know what's funny is something that that our brother Rafael Vargas says, that the truth is very simple, because what you just said is something very simple, but we had to do this entire explanation to come back to that. It's like the masters speak to us and they tell us, a very simple truth, 2 words, 3 words, a sentence in meditation, and you're like, oh man, I wonder what that means. And then you read a bunch of things and like, what does this mean? What could these possibly mean? And you put together all these different symbols. And then once you get it, you're like, oh, okay, yeah, if I just knew that.
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
Which is, again, the ability of the consciousness, right? That the consciousness has that ability to just connect all the dots and like, here, this is what it is, So thank you for that. If you can repeat that phrase again.
Oh, that the knowledge of oneself is directly connected to the perception that we have of ourselves.
Beautiful. And thank you. So yeah, let's close with that. And I want to open up to any questions. If there are any questions from the audience, again, thank you for joining us today, and for your patience in the beginning. We had a little bit of technical difficulties, but I can see that it all worked out. I can see that there are a few of you that are connected right now. I just want to say hello to you all. And if you have any questions or comments, I don't see any questions here. All right, I guess, Jonathan, I think we got the point across. There's no questions. Everyone just got it. Their consciousness are active today.
Shocking.
Yeah, and I mean, someone actually left a comment, which is very interesting. I think I would like to get into that in reference to the Christ. And we were talking about the inner Buddha, connecting with the inner Buddha, and someone said, or when connecting with the Christ is more profound truth in within. And so my friend JC right here is just making the point, right? And we like to explain in Gnosis that the Buddha or the Christ are 2 manifestations of the same thing, right? They're 2 manifestations of the one consciousness. which we call the spirit, Keter, or the monad, or the being, right? And remember that the Buddha and Jesus, or the teachings of Jesus and the teachings of the Buddha, complement each other. And this is one of the things that I really love about Gnosis, is that it is able to bring together the East and the West, right? And also that Buddhism is, a wonderful. They have many wonderful teachings, um, but at the same time, we have to recognize, right, the profound teachings in Christianity, and that Christianity brings that element of deeper devotion. Um, so you can see both, right? In Buddhism, the aim is to quiet the mind so that you can perceive God, and in Christianity is to open the heart so that the mind listens to the heart, and in the heart you can find God. You can find your inner divinity, right? So there is no conflict in that. So yeah, I just wanted to add that. I don't know if you'd like to add anything else.
No, I think essentially, you summed it up pretty well. That really, in the East, they focused a lot, or at least, in Buddhism, it's about dispelling the illusion of the consciousness, which then will naturally, you need to do that in order to take the next step that will then allow, the force or the presence of the being to descend more permanently into oneself. If we see them as disconnected, we don't really comprehend them. So, because they're really an alignment and an expression of the same truth with the same goal, really. And both of these masters, what we know of their teaching is only a fraction of what they taught.
Yeah, for sure. Okay. Well, Jonathan, thank you again for joining us. This has been it's great to have you, and I hope that the conversation was as enlightening for you as it was for me and for everyone else that joined us.
Yeah, it was
And
really
thank
great.
you all.
Thank you very much. Oh, sorry.
No, that's okay. Go ahead.
I just wanted to say thank you. Yeah, it's been nice we've known each other for a long time now. So it's nice to, that spiritual community, sharing the same values and, being able to express those values of the being and of the spirit together is something really valuable. And then, I hope that everyone got at least something out of this, or something to strengthen or reinforce within them.
For sure. I'm sure that everyone did. I mean, I did myself. So, okay. Well, so we'll say goodbye to you all. And just a reminder that we'll continue to have these Gnostic conversations. We will have one again next Monday, again at 8 p.m. We'll have another friend joining from the other side of the world, Adolfo, who you know. He's going to join us. Huh?
Represent.
Yeah, he's going to join us from Auckland, New Zealand. And so that's why we're changing the time a little bit. We usually do these conversations at 11 in the morning on Mondays. But that didn't really work out for those guys that are down under, like they say. So yeah, next week we'll be back at 8 p.m. And if you're in Australia, if you're in the Melbourne area, Jonathan and his wife, Suzanne, have a Gnostic school there. If you'd like to get in touch, if you wanted to go deeper into Gnosis, you can get in touch with me, send me a message, and I can put you in touch with them if you're in that side of the world. And if you're on this side, then join us again next week. And we have a few events coming up. If you go to our website, nycgnosis.com, you'll see the events that we have coming up for the rest of the week. All right. So again, thank you all for being here. Thank you, Jonathan.
Thank you, Jonathan.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Cool. I will see you all later. Bye-bye.
Good night.
Ciao. Bye.